Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to weekly Dharma Gathering. I'm really excited to have this first session again with Aarti Tejuja on our new platform. So Aarti actually launched our entire series back in February. And so it's really exciting, and also funny that she's also leading our first one on this new Vimeo platform that we're hosting our videos on. So for tonight's talk, Aarti is going to be giving us a session titled Reclaiming the Wisdom of the Sacred Feminine. It'll include a meditation and a Q&A discussion. I'm realizing I didn't introduce myself. My name is Adriana DeFazio, and I'm one of the hosts for Weekly Dharma Gathering. Beautiful. So a little bit about Aarti. I'm going to read her bio for us. Aarti Tejuja is the former director of social engagement for Shambhala International, where she worked with Shambhala centers globally to help shift the community's current insular culture to a more outward and engaged approach. Aarti currently runs her own organization, Spiritual Activism, which offers new tools to activists who struggle with the weight of emotions they face when fighting for a more balanced world. She also works with spiritual communities and individuals with strong spiritual practices who want help stepping out and engaging the world with conscious awareness. Aarti has served in a variety of roles with a diverse array of groups. She has managed youth programs, served on the boards of nonprofits, including Restored Hope, who advocate for underserved women and children, as well as Arrow Collective, and has participated in interfaith dialogues. In 2015, Pope Francis invited her to participate in a Buddhist Catholic dialogue in Rome. She successfully co-led 2 youth summits and 3 large mindfulness conferences created collaboratively with nonprofits and interfaith groups. Aarti lives with her husband, Matt, and kitties, Steve and Moshi. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that tonight's session is recorded for folks to watch after this live session. So if you prefer not to be seen, please make sure to turn off your camera feature via Zoom. And that this talk, once we're finished tonight, will be posted onto your product page on Vimeo within 48 hours for you to watch at your leisure whenever you want. I think that's it in terms of welcoming announcements. I'll leave the rest of the evening to Aarti.
Thank you. It's always a little bit funny to hear your own bio being read back to you. And then I realized I didn't update it because my cat Steve passed like 5 months ago. And I got 2 new kittens since then. So it's just funny. And I noticed the same thing, that I kicked this thing off and now I'm kicking off the new platform. I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Is that on purpose, or is that just something that happened? Or I just thought that was funny. Anyway, welcome. I would really love to, since we're such a small group, have this session be a little bit more interactive than just me talking and then you asking a few questions at the end, or however the format could go. So I would love it if possible, if we could introduce ourselves. Would that be okay with people? So that we could be more of a little like a community. Okay. So maybe we could just say our names, our pronouns, maybe where we're coming from, our location, and why this subject inspired you. Why did your heart tell you to come today? What brought you here? So I can just model that and then we can pass it along. So my name is Aarti and I go by the pronouns she and her. And I'm in Berwyn, Illinois, which is like 15 minutes away from Chicago, from downtown Chicago, I should say. So we're very, very close to the border of Chicago. And this subject really, really inspires me because I recently went on a women's goddess retreat, which I kind of accidentally ended up on. And, and I realized how much of my own self I sort of have, my own feminine energy that I am not in tune with. And realizing how important that has really been for me to become more in tune with that, and how important it is to keep staying in tune with that. So it's and as I started preparing for this talk, I really started to get even more like, you know, this is just such a juicy subject. So I'm excited about that we're going to talk about this today.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. You can call me V. My pronouns are she and they. I joined the weekly Dharma because I met Adriana last weekend at the BIPOC retreat in Rosendale, New York. Currently based in Beacon, New York. And I wasn't sure what the topic was going to be today, so I'm really just joining because I'm curious. I want to see, you know, want to discuss interesting things, and really working on building up my spiritual practice. So yeah, when I first heard of reclaiming the divine feminine, I'm definitely interested on where we're gonna go with that. You know, I feel like there's so many ways to go around that. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, hi. My name's Clay. My pronouns are he and him. I'm in San Francisco right now. That's where I live. I joined today because I really wanted to hear Aarti speak. I've been reading her stuff on Facebook, and I really enjoy that. And I wanted to hear something from her, like more in person. And the topic itself interests me because, I mean, who would not be interested in that? And just finding the balance in oneself, or in myself, is like an ongoing project, and the patriarchy, you know, I think has the balance so out of balance in the world. So that's why I'm here. I've spoken. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, again. I'm Adriana. I'm from Brooklyn, but I'm actually Zooming in right now for my parents up in Westchester, New York. I specifically wanted to host Aarti's talk today. Aarti, I thought your description that you wrote for this was really beautiful. It also struck me in a way that I wasn't really anticipating. This line in particular, our society has dictated that one is more valuable than the other, creating an imbalance in ourselves and in our world. Yeah, and a curiosity for myself of like what that imbalance is, and how that's manifested, and I guess how I'm not really cognizant or aware of how and it has. So I'm curious to learn more.
Thank you. It's great to be with all of you today. So maybe we can shift into a little practice. So I'm going to invite you, even during my talk, and in periods between while I'm talking, to really see if we can feel into what's coming up for us. So not just kind of at the beginning here, where we're kind of going to feel into what is coming up for us, but throughout, as we're kind of getting into this subject, of just what is happening in my body? Becoming very curious, what is happening here in my body as we talk about this subject? What do I think about this? Because so much of the time we're thinking from here, and we're taking in information and it's all coming in here and we're processing it up here. But we have feelings that are going on down here, right? That are trying to tell us something a lot of times. But we've really been conditioned, I think, in our society to kind of pride this up here, the sort of intellect and intellectual mind. So I'm going to invite you to sort of to weave practice into this entire talk and into this entire session, rather than it just be kind of at the beginning and that's it. So let's see if we can just ground into our bodies. So we'll just sit in our chairs and just feel the chair or whatever you're sitting on kind of underneath you. Just really get a sense of grounding. And you can have your eyes open if you want to, but you can also close them if it helps you to sort of focus on body. We can just notice the external sensations and the senses that are going on right now. So maybe just listen for any sounds that are where you are. And then take in any smells that are there. And any physical sensations that you might notice. The chair that you're sitting on. If you have a backrest, the back. The air in the room, the way your skin feels. Feeling your clothing against your skin. Just really getting a physical sense of your body. And then shifting your attention inward. Noticing any sensations that are happening inside the body. Any feelings, inner sensations. Breathing. Noticing or being aware of any chatter that's going on, thinking that's happening. Just noticing that. Seeing if we can get a full sense of what it's like to be here in this human form. Everything we're experiencing right now here in this moment. And if we have our eyes closed, we can open them now. Just allow yourself to come back to the group body. And so we'll just check in with ourselves like this throughout. So just notice what that was like. And we can call that body data, kind of our own data. We'll see how that kind of changes, if it does. And then I want to invite you and give you permission to move around as you wish. You don't have to be sitting in this chair. You don't, if you need to move, you can move. You can move our heads and hands, and shoulders, and kind of do what we need to do. Because the idea here is that we're going to really focus on listening to body. And so if our body says, well, right now, you know, sitting here is not good for me, then we're just going to listen to that wisdom. So just, I'm inviting you into that. So I'll talk for a short bit, and then we'll come back to checking in with ourselves and seeing if there's anything that came up for us, any questions that might have come up. And then I have more that I could talk about, but if we all feel like, you know, there's something we'd rather be doing, we'd rather talk about this, then we'll shift into that direction instead, and we'll sort of throw out the rest of my talk. We'll let the group kind of guide the direction we want to go in. And the idea of this is that I wanted to see how we could incorporate some feminine principle into this session. And masculine principle would tell us that we're on a timeline and we should follow a schedule, and that I should prepare a talk and I should deliver it to you. But feminine principle is saying, well, let's see what the group, what wisdom is coming out of this group, and where do we need to go with the energy. So I wanted to see if we could play with that a little bit, that idea. Any thoughts, any questions before I start talking? I have some allergies going on, so I'm trying not to cough. Allergic to the grass outside, I swear. Like I said, the inspiration for wanting to do this really came out of this yoga goddess retreat that I found myself in. And I won't go into the details of how I got there. I don't exactly know if I knew what I was actually getting into. But it was really twofold. It was really going through the stages. It was a women's retreat, and it was going through the stages of womanhood and really exploring each stage. And part of it was really talking about the female anatomy. But the other part of it was really talking about feminine energy and what that is. And I found myself just looking at all the people in the room and seeing that they were all women, and feeling very much, each time I went to bed at night, I was really feeling like, this is actually not just for women. This is for everyone. Like, right, so because we all have masculine energy and feminine energy. We have both of these energies in us. But in our society, our energy is our society really puts masculine energy on a pedestal, and really makes that very important. And so we may not even know or understand our own feminine energy very well because of that. And so we have to work a lot harder, almost. Not work a lot harder, those are not good words. We have to feel in a lot harder, or feel in more, or make some extra effort, I think, to really tap into that part of ourselves, possibly. And it may be more natural for others. So I don't want to use that as a hardcore rule that that's the way it is, but that's the way I've experienced it. And so if we want to study the feminine in the Buddhist context or in the Dharma, we can really turn to, specifically in Tibetan Buddhism, we can really turn to the Dakini principle. And we can really turn to the principle of Yab Yum, which is, you've seen probably pictures in the Tibetan tradition of the deities in union. And the deities in union are really meant to stand for the masculine and feminine being balanced within each one of us. And so lots of those practices are really about being in balance and learning to balance. So if we wanted to study this on our own, we could really go in that direction and start studying those teachings. And they're not easy to find necessarily. They're not as obvious as you may think. And I think that has to do with the Tibetan lineages itself being more patriarchal. That the teachings exist, but they're a little bit harder to find. So we can kind of credit some of the teachers like Judith Zimmer Brown and Lama Tsultrim Leon and Rita Gross, Tani Sarah, some teachers who have really, been talking a lot about this. And if you Google them, you'll find talks and things which are really helpful. And then new teachings that are sort of starting to come about that I wouldn't necessarily call Buddhist, but things like emergent strategies, that Adrienne Marie Brown's work, and other new kinds of, I think people are starting to catch on to this feminine principle. So it's not just ancient Buddhism, but it's also, we can look to teachers now in the current moment as well. Yeah, and then we can also look to traditions outside of Buddhism who have who talk about the feminine principle. Yeah, so if we were kind of looking at this ourselves, we could go there. But what I want to do today is kind of talk a little bit about what is this? Why should we do this? Why should we even get in touch with the sacred feminine? And what is the sacred feminine? So the sacred feminine, if it's really about healing the sacred feminine in ourselves is really about healing. And that's kind of the key word. It's about healing. And it's about creating a balance. And because we don't have this in our society right now, because we're so masculine focused, we have things like toxic masculinity. So that's a word that gets tossed around now a lot in social justice circles and just in a broader sense now too, toxic masculinity. And that really, to me, when I think about toxic masculinity, is in over-identification of the masculine side, right? That where it's like we're so focused on that it becomes toxic, So we're not trying to throw out the masculine per se. It's just that we're saying that we're really we've leaned so much on one side of ourselves that we're so out of balance that it's become a toxic situation. And so the effects of that, we see the effects of that as coming out as disease, disease within ourselves, mental suffering. We see it in the form of devaluing human beings. We see environmental imbalances going on. And we see lots of damage. And I'm sure that there's lots of things you could think of that we could bring into that. And the great thing about it is when we are able to be in balance, we actually can start giving off a balanced energy out into the world. So we're not only doing ourselves a service, but we're actually contributing to the world in some way by finding a balance in ourselves. People can feel that. People can start to sense it and feel it. And so we're kind of offering a service to other people too. That kind of energy kind of trickles out. So what is this sacred feminine? So I think it's easier to illustrate by kind of comparison contrasts of how we use masculine principle. And why it's so hard to, I think, talk about feminine principle too is that we've been so conditioned in the masculine that the feminine is hard to see sometimes, right? So it's even an exploration for me. I can't, that's why I'm like, I don't feel like the expert of this necessarily, but why it's important to be in discussion constantly, I think, about this with other people. So one of the things is intuition versus intellect. So it's kind of like that sort of gut feeling you get. You know, have you ever been in a situation where you're walking and you just have this really strong feeling you shouldn't be talking to this person, or you have this really, really strong feeling you shouldn't be here, or something is telling you, no, you shouldn't do that thing. You know, that's really like the intuition that's coming up, that's sort of telling you no or yes, sort of that guidance, that inner guidance, right? Versus the intellect, which is constantly sort of talking and chattering, right? And they're both important, but we've really prided intellect and we don't work too much on intuition. In fact, sometimes we shut our own intuition down. We devalue it. We say, well, that's silly. Be quiet. No, you just, that doesn't make any sense, you know? So it's really placing back a value on intuition. The second one, sort of illustrating feminine principle, is that it's circular and collective instead of what we have now, which is mostly top down and hierarchical and very focused on the individual being. Right? So I like to think of it or feel into this as thinking of it as like the top down structures we have in like a corporation. You know, we have these top down structures everywhere, not just corporations, but it's like the guy at the top or the woman at the top or whoever's at the top, and then they're in charge of the whole thing, and then these two are underneath them, and there's people underneath them, and you have the people at the bottom, you know, who don't get heard, you know. And so it's a sort of like individualistic kind of approach, and very top down. Whereas if you think of a circular structure, you know, what does that feel like? What is a circular, like, just feel into what a circle might feel like. There's no edges, you know, we don't know who's most important necessarily when we're sitting in a circle. We don't know who's necessarily in charge. You know, it could be anyone. The idea of, well, we all have wisdom to share and contribute to. So it's that idea of circle. So then another one, trusting the group body. So trusting the group body versus trusting the expert. So right now we're sort of in a masculine formation. I'm sitting here and I'm talking to you and you're taking in information. And that's not bad. There's times and places for that. But the feminine approach for that would really be more around the idea of facilitation. And actually saying, well, actually there's wisdom in this group body. How can I, as a facilitator, hold the space so that that wisdom can arise in the space? So that everybody's wisdom comes in. And there's a lot of trust in that, like really trusting, like actually we all have this wisdom. And if we just allow it to come out, then we don't know what could happen, which might be a little scary, right? There's the vulnerability in that. And there's, we have to be comfortable in the not knowing. We have to be like willing to just see what arises and allow for emergence to happen rather than knowing anything in that kind of a space. So, I think this one particularly really, I was thinking about this today. I think that this idea of facilitation, you know, a really good facilitator, if someone is a really good facilitator, you often don't even really know that they're there. You know, they're sort of like, they're there and they're holding the space, and you know somebody's holding the space, but they're not. Like, the whole thing is not about them. And you can sort of feel that. And they almost become invisible versus like, you're all paying attention to me now, right? And I'm getting a lot of visibility because you're all looking at me. And if I was facilitating right now, that might not be the case. And so I wonder sometimes if maybe feminine principle gets overlooked, because really good feminine principle is like not necessarily that visible, kind of hidden. So, yeah, this idea of facilitation. Then another one is, which is, we already kind of touched in on this, but emergence and just letting things arise in the space versus trying to control them and force them to be a certain way. Like, I want my talk to be like this, and this is what I'm delivering, and that's it. You know, and instead just allowing. And that kind of, for me, brings up this idea of time too. So there's like this, what we're doing right now is we have a time limit, right? We're ending at 8:10 or 7:10 my time, but we're starting at a beginning time and we're ending at a particular time. And usually in our lives, that's how things are. They're very scheduled. And in feminine principle, it's not the same kind of time. It's kind of like the natural order of time. So it's like things are going to kind of happen when they're going to happen. So for example, we could look like at this talk here, and at the end at 8:10, we'll know whether we're actually done or not. We may have to end anyway, even if we're not done, but we'll feel in our bodies whether we're actually done with this topic. Like, we may come to 8:10 and we may say, you know, that's enough for me. That felt really good. I might want to revisit this subject some other time, but for now, that was good. That was enough. Or we might say, you know what, that didn't feel done. I still wanted to talk about XYZ thing, it just wasn't over. And so when we're talking about time, the feminine principle doesn't have a time restriction. You know, it doesn't have a kind of beginning and end necessarily. It just is, and we can tell by feeling. And this really comes up if you've ever been part of a peace circle, a restorative justice peace circle. You know, sometimes I facilitate those sometimes, and people will be like, "Can we get it done in 2 hours?" And I'll be like, "Well, we can try," but the answer, you know, there might be a conflict, and we don't know how long each story is going to take. We don't know when we're going to actually be done. We're done. It really does come to a natural ending. You know, a solution, the group body actually says, yeah, we're done. So I think that's an idea of time is really interesting to explore. You know, what really is it? We sort of made up this man-made time. Then the idea of nurturing. Versus the idea that we're all responsible for our own self. You know, we've got to be, we've got to make sure that we're good and we can pay the bills and all that stuff. But this idea of nurturing and the community care, and that we're interconnected, and therefore we're responsible for one another in community. So this sort of individualistic kind of world we kind of are really submerged in right now, to this idea of what's the opposite of that feel like. Then this idea of interconnectedness really comes in. So, and here we can really see this really play out in ecology and the earth. So the interconnectedness that all creatures and our earth and me, we're all connected. We're all dependent upon one another. We're all sort of in collaboration with each other, with all these elements. And versus this idea that here's the earth over here, there's the creatures, all the creatures of the earth are over there, and here's me. And me as a being, I'm superior. It's about me. And the earth is separate from me somehow. So I'm going to do environmentalism as though environmentalism is over there, right? Instead of environmentalism is right here, because the reason I'm doing it is because I'm so connected to it. I could feel it. I could feel the pain when something is happening. You know, when I see a sea creature eating plastic and being consumed and killed by it, and I see the photos, and I can feel that in my body because I'm connected to that. You know, so that's idea, interconnectedness. And then the last one that has come up for me, actually two more. This idea of abundance for everyone, which leads to no fear of collaboration. So here in our society now, we often come up against this idea of scarcity, where we all have to grab some stuff because there's not enough to go around. And I see this a lot in the nonprofit world, especially here in Chicago. I don't know what it's like where you live, but in the nonprofit world here in Chicago, where everyone's competing for funding a lot of times. And you'll have these two nonprofits and they'll be doing very similar work, but they won't talk to each other because they're competing for funding and there's scarcity mentality, and right? As opposed to, I always think like, what if these two groups collaborated? You know, they're doing very similar things. What could potentially happen if collaborated instead of fighting for this pool of money? So this idea that, you know, there's not enough for everyone, and which is a myth, you know, this idea of abundance and shifting our mindset into that idea of abundance. And then the very last one, and there's lots more to this, but the very last one that I could talk about is this idea of radical rest. So the world right now, as we know it, is all about action. Action's a very masculine principle. So action, action, action. And so the feminine is rest, being in rest, and which we don't make enough time for often because our world is so demanding of us. It really says action is prided over rest. And so, you know, what would it look like to be in balance of those two things? There's some action, but there's also some rest. So some of these you have to kind of feel into a little bit. But I want to pause there and maybe just take a moment. Just see what's coming up for you in your body. And then I want to open it up a little bit and see what's on your minds. Just hearing that and feeling into that. What do you think about this idea of the sacred feminine? Did any of that make any sense?
Yeah, for me, it makes a lot of sense. I think listening to more of like the energy around feminism versus masculine energy, I kind of feel very in line with feminine energy. I just facilitated something yesterday, and when you were just talking about being invisible and kind of allowing people's knowledge in a room to come through, that felt very successful for me. Like that was happening. So I felt like in my body, I felt like this connectedness, I guess you could say, kind of like goosebumps in a way. Yeah, so I'm also thinking, all right, so how I think I'm really in line with feminine energy, with relaxing and not necessarily taking a lot of action maybe in certain ways. And I feel like so that was a lot of those thoughts were coming up of like, how can I balance with bringing in masculine energy also. So that's what I was thinking about while listening to you speak about the feminine energy.
Yeah, something that came up for me was just thinking about how I guess those feminine principles manifest in different areas of my life, where it's like really easy for me to be in touch with my feminine principles, I think, in meditation spaces. But when I'm like working, that's less the case. And then also just like a larger like societal contemplation about like new age feminism, like like feminist women's rights, how I feel like in some way we've like adopted masculine qualities in order to regain our power in some way, which actually devalues our power in some capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking like, that's why I like talking about it in terms of feminine and masculine energy, because I see women all the time that are like really like, you know, in the name of equality are putting out a lot of masculine energy and then just adopted that way of doing things. It's interesting. So how can we get, so it's interesting what Vanessa, you said too, is that you actually feel more in touch with your feminine and you feel like out of balance with masculine. So I think that's really important, is that, you know, we're looking at both of these things. We're not sort of, it's just that a lot of the times in our world, the masculine is really in our face. It's just right there in the institutions that we have built, I should say. The masculine is really right there. And a lot of our institutions aren't run, you know, in a sort of intuitive, circular fashion.
Yeah, it may be because the current work that I'm doing, it's like a newer project, and it feels like there is a lot of masculine energy. So I'm like bringing the feminine energy. So that's probably what might be happening, where it's like I see this, and also like understanding how masculine energy, like you said, is just so ingrained in our world and in our society. And I'm just kind of like, we need more balance. So I don't know if it's just a part of me that's kind of like, all right, so I got to bring the feminine energy here. But also, as I'm thinking about feminine energy, I also think in my partnership, I bring a lot of the feminine energy, and my partner brings a lot of the masculine energy. So I think, I don't know, just around me, I might, feel like there's so much masculine energy that I need to like bring this feminine energy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point too. It's like, sometimes we could actually tailor our energy depending on what kind of group we're in. You know, like if there's too much feminine energy in a group, we might go, you know, we need to get some action going on here. Nothing's going to happen otherwise. Or it may be, you know, oh my God, this group is like, everybody wants to like be heard here, you know, or be in control or whatever it is. I'm just going to see if I can be over here holding the space. You know, we could probably adapt to that. So I'm curious, like when you said that, do you feel like when you're bringing that kind of feminine energy that people are drawn to that? Like how is that How are people taking that?
I do. I think it's funny because it's like, so we'll sit down and try to collaborate on something that needs to, for example, I'll just use the training we did yesterday. And I put an input in about, hey, we should really bring in this philosophy. And my supervisor, who's masculine, he identifies as a Black male, like continue to kind of say, no, I think we should do this, and I'd said it a couple of times and it's like, no, I think we should do this. And then when he sent me what he felt the flow should be, I just told him, just, hey, I think, what if we added this and this? And he was like, go ahead, just add it. And I said, all right, great. So I just like kind of created something completely different and sent it to him. And he was like, oh my God, this is so excellent. And then we did it. And he was like, wow, I didn't know anything about this. And I'm like, I definitely had this conversation with you at least 3 times, trying to engage you in this kind of philosophy. And then so when it showed up, like they were very like receptive in so many ways. And that's what it seems to be like, of like, when it's happening, it's, yes, I get the gravitation and I get like the feedback afterwards and that kind of thing. When we're leading up to it, there's definitely a resistance.
Yeah, that's what I was saying about, people being magnetized to that. I think sometimes it's not always obvious, but then you get this like, oh, I never even would have thought to do it that way. And then they see it working. And then there's something, then they're drawn to that, and I think it helps to bring their feminine energies out. Yeah. Clay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I also noticed that you're quiet, so you don't have to say anything, but I just wanted to see what was happening for you.
Sure. I guess, should I take myself off mute if I want to talk, or?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, the thing that resonated for me the most about what you said was the circle versus the hierarchy. And what was I going to say about that? I mean, we're so hierarchical in the world, I think, and it reminded me of the language of power over and power with. Like the hierarchy literally has somebody at the top that's over the layers, and the circle's kind of like with. But when you described that, I kind of had an insight about the balance of it. Like sometimes the circle's like the way to go, but not always. And sometimes the hierarchy is the way to go, but not always. So I guess I feel like, for me, it's like we have so much less circle than we need. I'm always like circle, 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 circle. But hearing you describe it, I can see the balance is the way to go. It's not just one or the other. And I didn't really get that till you were describing it just there. Oh, and when you talk about masculinity and toxic masculinity being just like too much masculinity, it's like when it's always hierarchical again and again and again, and like the people at the top have like almost everything, they're so good at being at the top, then that could be toxic. I mean, maybe if, in some world they're like circling all the time, and that could get problematic, but I would like to see that, just for the hell of it. It would be cool. Thanks.
Funny you say that, because I was trying to think of what toxic femininity would be today. Let's try and feel that in my body. And, and then I was like, yes. And I read, in some of my reading, I was like, one of the teachers said, we can't really worry about that in our world too much because we're so imbalanced right now. We've got so much toxicity on one end that's causing so much that we just need like a whole influx of feminine energy. It's like, You know, I could see that it could become toxic. It could become very passive, I think. It could become very passive and then nothing happens. There's no movement. That's kind of what I kind of feel when I think of toxic femininity, but I don't see that happening right now. So it could happen in some certain spaces. I've been in spaces where like there really isn't any movement, but then maybe you want to bring in a little masculine energy to the mix. Yeah. So the other piece of this is what I was thinking was, how do we then bring out more of the feminine into our world? You know? And one way, or which I already mentioned, was really studying the different things that are kind of out there that are talking about this right now, like emergent strategies, or some of our Buddhist teachers who've been talking about feminine principle. And if you just Google feminine principle, it's really interesting to see what comes up. His teachings around Mary Magdalene, for example, and like, you know, the sort of suppressed part of the Christian tradition. You know, it's all very kind of interesting. And you can kind of go in and study. But some other, and then we can also study, you know, I was looking, are there really any matriarchal traditions here on our earth? And there's like a lot of stuff that says that the anthropologists are saying there never really was a matriarchal or true matriarchal tradition. But then I read about the, I hope I'm not butchering this, Minangkabau of Indonesia, which is really sounds like a matriarchal tradition. And it's sort of interesting to kind of read more about that and see how they've set up their society. So just feeling into that, I think, is interesting. And then some other ways, I like that this whole idea, I've been doing a lot of this, is dreaming. You know, what does it actually feel like? And what can we dream about? What would that look like if we had a lot more circles, or we had a lot more of this intuition and all these feminine? What if we were in balance? What does a balanced world even feel like? So if we haven't had one in years and years and years, and we've never lived in one, what would that feel like? And so I like the idea of just being able to dream other worlds. And then bringing in more nurturing, I think, is something we can all do. You know, what is that? How do we bring people together in community to cook and eat and be together in just these ways that don't have like agendas? Celebrating holidays and milestones and things like that. And then I think the other really big aspect is uncovering it from within. Like, we actually have the knowledge here, which Vanessa, you were really talking about that anyway. But, you know, I think these practices that we have, like mindfulness, somatics, body-centered wisdom, that we've been talking about we're doing a little bit here. We don't know what intuition is a lot of times until we can start to recognize it. And if we don't know we don't know the difference between our intellect and intuition, then we won't be listening to it. We won't be listening for it. You know, we have to be aware that something is arising in us in order to move in that direction. So I think these practices really offer us a chance to really get to know that part of us. So there's practice. So uncovering it from within feels really important. And then another kind of underneath uncovering from within is really spending time with nature and like feeling, what does interconnectedness really mean? And not intellectualizing it so much, but really feeling it. Like, what does it feel like when I'm with this tree? What does it feel like when I'm looking at this bird? You know, who is this bird? Who is this? Who are these other beings around us? And becoming very curious of the seen and the unseen, and the magic that sort of surrounds us that often we kind of take for granted. So being in nature, I think, is a big way. And then not forcing things to happen all the time. So I know we live in a world of timelines, but sometimes maybe we can just play with time a little bit. And I think it might be fun to try not being so goal oriented, or saying, you know, actually we want this in our lives, and we're just going to allow time to take us there. We're going to allow things to kind of arise on their own and see what happens, what emerges in this space, rather than trying to make it happen. You know? So just intentionally doing that in some aspects of our life. Noticing when scarcity mind is coming up. I mean, that's a big thing for me. I noticed it. I've noticed I'm being very competitive right now. Like, what is that about? Like, why do I think, you know, there's not enough to go around here? Like, what is that about? So shifting that and really focusing, moving scarcity into, well, how can I collaborate with this person instead of feeling like I need to compete with them all the time? You know, maybe there's another way. Do I need to compete with them all the time? Getting off the me plan, or you know, helping others, you know, sort of like shifting the attention off of ourselves, our own egos. Doing practices like Tonglen, you know, which really are about thinking of others. And then considering spaces and structures like that you're actually in, you know. So if say you're going to give a talk or something, you could just be like, is this the most nurturing space could I change the space? Can I shift the space into a circle if I'm sitting in a lecture hall? Is it possible to create some other way that I could let the group body wisdom come out more? Is this a nurturing space I'm in? Could I change it to make it more nurturing somehow? Can I facilitate a conversation instead of being very top-down teaching? And can I do a balance of both, half and half? You know, how can I shift kind of the ways I do it? So just kind of moving in that. So those are some of the ways that I am envisioning, and I'm sure that there are more. What do you all think about that? Do you have other ways that you can think of? Or do you have any thoughts on any of those ways? Any insights?
I think those are good ways. I don't have like another way. I was thinking about the thing about timeline driven stuff, and the word deadline. I mean, it's got dead right in there. I mean, it's like, what is up with that? We're always meeting deadlines and stressing. It's like, really, would it matter if we finished it a day later, or a week later, or we did it and then we just got rid of it? I mean, that's, I'm like, really? Are you paying attention to these timelines? We never adhere to them. We always run over. We always say we'll do it faster. And then half the time we don't even use it. I'm talking about like what goes on in my work. So I just want to make that comment about the time.
I often think of those things like things that you use to try to get closer to that idea as kind of as another type of technology, you know, so like kind of making a circle as a, you know, the technology of making a circle and how does it work, or the technology of a really good debrief that gets everybody to at least say something about what their experience was.
Hi, Chris. I didn't know you were there. You weren't showing up on the top of my screen until I clicked the arrow.
Oh, okay.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Sorry I was late. I got confused about time zones.
That's okay.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those ways to try to insert more feminine energy. One of the things that comes up for me when thinking of that, of like facilitating a, you know, like a circle, and how could we, you know, change the space to be more nurturing. And the one thing that comes up, because my partner also facilitates a lot, and I know that they came into a place where they were trying to insert kind of more feminine energy, and there was so much like drawback, like, why are we in a circle? Because they're very with an organization that's very, you know, hierarchical, and so it makes me feel like, oh yeah, like developing the relationship so that they're, you know, more trusting. And like, also, would it make sense to kind of talk a little bit more about why we're going to get in a circle? So those things are currently kind of going around in my head.
This is one of the first things that you said, Aarti, but it also really struck me, being in community without agenda. Like, oh my gosh, where does that exist? I just feel like I tried to, me and a few other folks tried to do make like a mixed race group. And it was just so funny because we like couldn't get our stuff together to like make it happen. We ended up just having dinner, two of us. But yeah, it's so hard, I think, with busy lives and busy schedules, to like meet intentionally in community without like really having like an aim beyond feeling in community. Yeah, it's awful.
So just that, you know, that whole busy lives, busy schedules thing, that's like what I mean by the masculine has taken over so much that we can't even find the space for anything else, you know? So I feel like when we're talking about this, we're actually talking about something very radical. You know, like when we talk about engagement and activism, what we're talking about, like this idea of being in community with no agenda, like that's like literally inserting feminine principle back into society, so in some way. Like, because no one does that. We don't do that. And yet, you know, if it happens, it feels really refreshing. You know, I had somebody over to my house for dinner last night, and it was because we were meeting about something. So we had an agenda, but it was so funny because we decided to have dinner, and like, we totally just didn't get to the agenda stuff until like it was really late because we really just wanted to hang out, you know, with no agenda. It's like we're longing for that. We're so thirsty for that. It's so funny how we've created all this stuff that we have to do. Yeah, that I'm wondering, you know, if the radical act is actually, you know, not doing that. So I'm curious what you're noticing about this format. I was trying to play a little bit with masculine and feminine even here, you know, the parts where I'm giving a talk and it feels like you're listening to a talk, and then the parts where we're bringing our ideas in community, you know, as best as we can in an online format, because it's a little bit of a funny community when you're looking at a computer screen. But curious, does anybody have any thoughts around that? Or feelings about that? What this feels like? What one feels like to be listening to a person, and then the other feels like to be more of a circle. It's cool if you don't.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, transitioning onto this new platform, this Vimeo platform, we also made a decision to change the format of how these talks like even occurred. So we used to be on this webinar format where like the person leading the Dharma talk only saw themselves, the host, and the host only had the capacity to like bring someone onto the screen. It was really a controlled environment. And a lot of feedback we got from both teachers and participants was, it was just like strange. You couldn't, it was like this like black sheet, like where you couldn't really see through. And we also noticed that it impacted Q&A session, like the section at the end, like it impacted discussion in the sense that there was no, because participants couldn't tell who else was there, like because all they saw was just the speaker. There was like a sense of like no accountability in like shared vulnerability and participation in some way. Like there was no, like the community aspect was lost. Yeah, and even, I mean, Aarti, even you choosing to like switch up the format, yeah, it felt less like a Dharma talk and a Dharma gathering, which is really, I mean, the name of the series. So it's fitting.
Yeah, and some of it was just, I didn't know what would happen, but I was curious as to what would arise if we just did it this way, instead of leaving a Q&A at the end and seeing, you know, what could happen if we just dispersed it. So yeah, I was one of those people that was like, this is so weird to be talking into a screen and have no idea who I'm looking at. So I much prefer this. It's really nice to be with all of you for this hour and just spend some time talking about this subject. And this is a really, really big subject. I mean, we could probably have a talk on each one of these points. And we could get really into each one of these points and go much, much further. So we're just scratching the surface with talking about this. So I hope you will be willing to explore this in yourselves and in the world, because I feel like this is just so needed. So the sense of balance, not just for the world, but even for ourselves, you know, finding this balance here can really enrich our lives. So I leave you with that. Maybe just for a couple of minutes, we can go back into the feeling body a little bit. Just notice what's here. See if we can notice the trajectory we went on from the beginning. Has anything shifted in our body? Is it the same? And then asking ourselves, what do we need to do after this is over? What do we need to do next? What are our bodies telling us to do next? Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today and being part of this conversation.
Thank you, Aarti. Thank you, everyone who joined live this evening as well. It's really awesome and exciting to see all of you via Zoom in this way. It's so cool that we're all over the country and connecting in this capacity too. So some closing announcements. Like I said at the very beginning, this talk will be available for your access to watch at any time. It'll be posted on Vimeo 48 hours following this talk. And then next week, on July 31st, Lama Rod Owens will be joining us for a talk titled The Dharma of Resiliency, which should be a really great talk. If you aren't a subscriber, so on this platform, we have two options. You can either pay for individual talks, or you can subscribe monthly and receive every talk per week for $25 instead, and then have access to the entire archive of Dharma talks. So encourage you to do that if you just want to have these talks come into your inbox on a weekly basis and get the live links. But otherwise, you can join us when you can, purchasing talks individually. So yeah, I think that's it for this evening. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you, Aarti.
Thank you. Nice to meet everyone.
Christopher, yes, that's right. Subscription is $25 a month, or $250 for the total year. So each one has like a discount. $250 a year, I think, is a $50 discount versus $25 a month times 12. This is like my basic math right now. But yeah, if you go to weeklydharmagathering.com and click subscribe on the front page, it'll bring you right to it. Great. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.